Hi, I'm Danny Jarabek here with Awards Radar, and I'm speaking with Malte Grunert, producer of All Quiet on the Western Front, a film currently on Netflix and nominated for 9 Oscars. Malte, thank you for with me today. And first of all, I want to say congratulations on the success of this film. I'm sure it is a huge honor to receive this acclaim on a global level.
Thank you, and thank you very much for sort of having me. It's yes, I mean, sort of it's sort of it was unexpected, and it's beautiful to see this recognition, especially sort of the depth of the recognition for all our departments in so many fields. To see the fantastic work of our DP, our sort of makeup and hair, sort of our composer recognized. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a huge honor as a producer to not only see the film being acclaimed at the highest level for Best Picture, but also so many of your department heads and craft contributors being recognized for their incredible work as well. But to begin, I want to just get your perspective on just how this story came to be told, how the vision started before any sort of production even began, and what that process was like just joining into collaboration with Edward Berger and what this story came to be.
Edward Berger and I were we've known each other for some years, and we were working on something which sort of we ended up putting aside and have since picked up when this opportunity presented itself. I was sent a script by Leslie Patterson and Ian Stokell, two writers who sort of are co-nominated with Edward for Best Adapted Screenplay. They had managed to option the novel for, I think, 12 or 13 years by the time I read a draft of their script. And they had in various different sort of setups tried to get the film going as an English language film and had never managed to do so. In the last incarnation, sort of they were working with the producer Daniel Dreyfus, who's still a credited producer on the film. But when I read the script, to me, and I contacted Edward, to me it seemed like an obvious blind spot that this had never been made in the German language. It's a sort of seminal book that is also so important because it is a very German perspective on war, and the German perspective is quite different from an American or a British perspective. Both countries were attacked, needed to defend themselves in the First and Second World War. They sort of entered the war, sort of being forced into it, came out victorious. The German perspective of having started both wars and losing both is very different. The German perspective of war is not a heroic one. It's full of guilt and shame and regret and responsibility to talk about the past so that it may not repeat itself. And that is a perspective, especially with the opportunity of adapting this novel for the very first time into a German language film, the original film of the novel, that was unique, and that was really sort of what drove me and Edward.
What does it mean to your team and Edward and everyone involved to be able to be the first adaptation of this story in its original German language and be represented at Germany as the best international feature at the Oscars and in many other awards locations? What does it mean to just, be representative and telling that story from your perspective?
And we're all incredibly honored by the recognition, and sort of the scope of the recognition was really unexpected for all of us. It's we all sort of, and that's, I think that's also true for all of our heads of departments, especially the German ones, when Edward and I approached them, everybody was immediately intrigued, also quite intimidated by sort of the amount of work and the importance of the novel, and sort of and trying to not screw it up, especially as it had been made into sort of a sort of absolute masterpiece of filmmaking before. So to see that we apparently managed to make a film jointly that an audience can connect to and take something away that isn't just a movie-going experience, but something that sparks debate and that adds something to a conversation, just makes us all really proud.
And you speak about this film adding to a conversation. Right now, this film is nearly a century produced later than its predecessor, but is as relevant as ever. And so, how do you think this film just fits into the message it's trying to tell, with especially the tragic events going on in the world right now?
Um, when we sort of started making the film, obviously the escalation of the war in the Ukraine was unforeseeable to us. So our film, and also Remarque's novel, I don't think was ever intended to be a commentary on what is the right amount of self-defense against an outside attack, or how to best do that. I think what felt relevant to us, independently of its horrible timeliness with the war in the Ukraine right now, but what felt relevant is that All Quiet on the Western Front is a story of young men who are being fed right-wing propaganda and nationalistic lies, and they fall prey for those lies and go to war thinking they're entering an adventure. Most closely probably to the perspective of maybe young Russian conscripts right now who are being sent into battle in the Ukraine, who sort of have been listening to right-wing nationalistic propaganda at home, and who, as I've read in articles, when they get to the front, are actually being handed recycled uniforms from before they're sent off as cannon fodder into the trenches in the eastern Ukraine. So I think it's what felt relevant is this story is also a reminder to us of what can happen if we as a society don't defend ourselves and don't defend democracy against these right-wing propaganda and nationalist lies.
And of course, this film is close to home, being produced in the German language, as we said. But I want to hear your perspective on some of the obstacles you faced in producing this film, because it is, of course, in relative to the beauty and the craft of the film, on a relatively small budget compared to many major blockbuster films that you might see. But yet you were clearly so able to achieve a high level of craft and production value on that budget. And so I just want to hear your perspective on some of the challenges and some ways that you overcame that.
It's obviously sort of a production like that is challenging, especially if you want to make sure sort of that there is a visceral experience, and sort of and an audience can somehow feel the cold and the wet and the sort of and the hardship. Even though I shy away from sort of any comparison of filmmaking to war, right? Sort of just to make that very, very clear. Sort of one is a technical sort of challenge that needs to be coordinated and well planned, sort of, and is an entirely different thing. But the challenges for us obviously were we did have relatively contained budget. Sort of, we had to shoot the film in 51 or in the end 52 days, which required a lot of planning and very careful planning
Mm-hmm.
in sort of how big does our set really need to be. How do we achieve to get across the battlefield with camera equipment while it was still, it felt very muddy and cold and wet, and we so that our actors don't get stuck, or sort of our equipment doesn't get stuck. And how do we create a makeup of mud that sort of that stays in continuity, and sort of and Heike Merker, our sort of head of makeup and hair, sort of, she had this mud lab with sort of like 60 different varieties of color and texture, sort of, that would dry differently and so forth. And all of these, there are lots of details, sort of, but sort of, to sum it up, I think, and that's maybe sort of a banal truth, but sort of, as you enter into something like this, which I had no idea on how to do that, it's important to sort of realize what you don't know, be open in communicating about the things you don't know, find people that have a better idea than you do yourself, and then you need to listen to them when they tell you what they need in order to achieve what you're asking them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to close out here before we run out of time and say congratulations on all of the efforts of you and your entire team. And I wish you all the best of luck moving forward into the Oscars and the legacy of this film as it stands.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for your time.